Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 212. Chapter 212. On August 25th, the eve of the Battle of Borodino, Monsieur de Bassières, prefect of the French Emperor's palace, arrived at Napoleon's quarters at Valievo with Colonel Favier, the former from Paris and the latter from Madrid. Donning his court uniform, Monsieur de Bassières ordered a box he had brought for the emperor to be carried before him, and entered the first compartment of Napoleon's tent, where he began opening the box while conversing with Napoleon's aides-de-camp, who surrounded him. Favier, not entering the tent, remained at the entrance talking to some generals of his acquaintance. The Emperor Napoleon had not yet left his bedroom, and was finishing his toilet. Slightly snorting and grunting, he presented now his back and now his plump, hairy chest to the brush with which his valet was rubbing him down. Another valet, with his finger over the mouth of a bottle, was sprinkling eau de cologne on the emperor's pampered body with an expression which seemed to say that he alone knew where and how much eau de cologne should be sprinkled. Napoleon's short hair was wet and matted on the forehead, but his face, though puffy and yellow, expressed physical satisfaction. "Go on, harder, go on," he muttered to the valet who was rubbing him, slightly twitching and grunting. An aide-de-camp, who had entered the bedroom to report to the emperor the number of prisoners taken in yesterday's action, was standing by the door after delivering his message, awaiting permission to withdraw. Napoleon, frowning, looked at him from under his brows. "No prisoners," said he, repeating the aide-de-camp's words. "They are forcing us to exterminate them. So much the worse for the Russian army. Go on, harder, harder," he muttered, hunching his back and presenting his fat shoulders. "All right, let Monsieur de Bassières enter, and Fabier too," he said, nodding to the aide-de-camp. "Yes, sire," and the aide-de-camp disappeared through the door to the tent. Two valets rapidly dressed His Majesty, and wearing the blue uniform of the guards, he went with firm and quick steps to the reception room. De Bassières's hands, meanwhile, were busily engaged arranging the present he had brought from the Empress on two chairs directly in front of the entrance. But Napoleon had dressed and come out with such unexpected rapidity that he had not time to finish arranging the surprise. Napoleon noticed at once what they were about, and guessed that they were not ready. He did not wish to deprive them of the pleasure of giving him a surprise, so he pretended not to see de Bassières, and called Fabier to him instead, listening silently and with a stern frown to what Fabier told him of the heroism and devotion of his troops fighting at Salamanca, at the other end of Europe, with but one thought, to be worthy of their emperor, and but one fear, to fail to please him. The result of that battle had been deplorable. Napoleon made ironic remarks during Fabier's account, as if he had not expected that matters could go otherwise in his absence. "I must make up for that in Moscow," said Napoleon. "I'll see you later," he added, and summoned de Bassières, who by that time had prepared the surprise, having placed something on the chairs and covered it with a cloth. De Bassières bowed low, with the courtly French bow, which only the old retainers of the Bourbons knew how to make, and approached him, presenting an envelope. Napoleon turned to him gaily and pulled his ear. "You have hurried here. I am very glad. Well, what is Paris saying?" he asked, suddenly changing his former stern expression for a most cordial tone. "Sire, all Paris regrets your absence," replied de Bassières, as was proper. But though Napoleon knew that de Bassières had to say something of this kind, and though in his lucid moments he knew it was untrue, he was pleased to hear it from him. Again he honored him by touching his ear. "I am very sorry to have made you travel so far," said he. "Sire, I expecting nothing less than to find you at the gates of Moscow," replied de Bussy. Napoleon smiled and, lifting his head absent-mindedly, glanced to the right. An aide-de-camp approached with gliding steps and offered him a gold snuff-box, which he took. "Yes, it has happened luckily for you," he said, raising the open snuff-box to his nose. "You are fond of travel, and in 3 days you will see Moscow. You surely did not expect to see the Asiatic capital. You will have a pleasant journey." De Bussy bowed gratefully at this regard for his taste for travel, of which he had not until then been aware. "Ha! What's this?" asked Napoleon, noticing that all the courtiers were looking at something concealed under their cloth. With courtly adroitness, de Bussy half turned and without turning his back to the emperor retired 2 steps, twitching off the cloth at the same time, and said, "A present to your majesty from the empress." It was a portrait, painted in bright colors by Gerard, of the son born to Napoleon by the daughter of the Emperor of Austria, the boy whom for some reason everyone called the King of Rome. A very pretty curly-headed boy with a look of the Christ and the Sistine Madonna was depicted playing at stick and ball. The ball represented the terrestrial globe, and the stick in his other hand a scepter. Though it was not clear what the artist meant to express by depicting the so-called King of Rome spiking the earth with a stick, the allegory apparently seemed to Napoleon, as it had done to all who had seen it in Paris, quite clear and very pleasing. "The King of Rome," he said, pointing to the portrait with a graceful gesture. "Admirable." With the natural capacity of an Italian for changing the expression of his face at will, he drew near to the portrait, and assumed a look of pensive tenderness. He felt that what he now said and did would be historical, and it seemed to him that it would now be best for him, whose grandeur enabled his son to play stick and ball with the terrestrial globe, to show, in contrast to that grandeur, the simplest paternal tenderness. His eyes grew dim. He moved forward, glanced round at a chair, which seemed to place itself under him, and sat down on it before the portrait. At a single gesture from him, everyone went out on tiptoe, leaving the great man to himself and his emotion. Having sat still for a while, he touched, himself not knowing why, the thick spot of paint representing the highest light in the portrait, rose, and recalled de Bussy and the officer on duty. He ordered the portrait to be carried outside his tent, that the old guard, stationed around it, might not be deprived of the pleasure of seeing the King of Rome, the son and heir of their adored monarch. And while he was doing Monsieur de Bussy the honor of breakfasting with him, they heard, as Napoleon had anticipated, the rapturous cries of the officers and the men of the old guard, who had run up to see the portrait. "Vive l'Empereur! Vive le roi de Rome! Vive l'Empereur!" came those ecstatic cries. After breakfast, Napoleon in de Bussy's presence dictated his order of the day to the army. "Short and energetic," he remarked when he had read over the proclamation, which he had dictated straight off without corrections. It ran, "Soldiers, this is the battle you have so longed for. Victory depends on you. It is essential for us. It will give us all we need: comfortable quarters and a speedy return to our country. Behave as you did at Austerlitz, Friedland, Wittspitz, and Smolensk. Let our remotest posterity recall your achievements this day with pride. Let it be said of each of you, he was in the great battle before Moscow." "Before Moscow," repeated Napoleon, and inviting Monsieur de Bussy, who was so fond of travel, to accompany him on his ride, he went out of the tent to where the horses stood saddled. "Your Majesty is too kind," replied de Bussy to the invitation to accompany the Emperor. He wanted to sleep, did not know how to ride, and was afraid of doing so. But Napoleon nodded to the traveler, and de Bussy had to mount. When Napoleon came out of the tent, the shouting of the guards before his son's portrait grew still louder. Napoleon frowned. "Take him away," he said, pointing with a gracefully majestic gesture to the portrait. "It is too soon for him to see the field of battle." De Bussy closed his eyes, bowed his head, and sighed deeply, to indicate how profoundly he valued and comprehended the Emperor's words. That concludes my reading of chapter 212. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A year of war and peace, Day 212. Can't stop, won't stop. Napoleon's favorite quantity is more. He wants more people to lavish praise on him. He wants more places to conquer. He wants more things to adorn his quarters. In short, the man desires luxury. The more luxury Napoleon collects, however, the more he'll have to expend to maintain it, and the more targets he'll provide his enemies. It's easy to forget when reading the opening paragraphs of today's chapter that Napoleon is at war, and not in some pampered salon of Paris. Multiple valets attend him. They apply eau de cologne to his cosseted body with the care and delicacy usually reserved for ancient artwork restoration. One valet appears to brush his chest hair. That's something I've never heard of before. While all of these important matters are attended to, an aide-de-camp awaits with news of the war effort. He also has time to admire a fine portrait of his son, the King of Rome. We can only assume that this desire for luxurious living has followed him everywhere he's been. One doesn't merely dip one's toes into the golden waters of opulence, one dives right in, Scrooge McDuck style. This chapter provides the reader with a concrete example of the folly of chasing after more. In Napoleon's desire for more lands to conquer, he has abandoned his focus. He receives news today of the western front of his war for more. Things have gone horribly wrong there. In the Battle of Salamanca, the Allied powers have earned a decisive victory over the French forces. Perhaps if he could forget his silken dreams of Eastern dominance, he would not have lost so dearly in the West, or jeopardized the entire conquest project itself. Daily meditation. Nature's wants are slight. The demands of opinion are boundless. Suppose that the property of many millionaires is heaped up in your possession. Assume that fortune carries you far beyond the limits of a private income, decks you with gold, clothes you in purple, and brings you to such a degree of luxury and wealth that you can bury the earth under your marble floors. That you may not only possess but tread upon riches, add statues, paintings, and whatever any art has devised for the satisfaction of luxury. You will only learn from such things to crave still greater. Natural desires are limited, but those which spring forth from false opinion can have no stopping point. Seneca, on Philosophy, the Guide of Life. And that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 212. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening with me today. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 213. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.